Hello and welcome to the WellCare Podcast by Citius Retreats. My name's George Bownes and I'm a sports and exercise medicine consultant and founder of Citius Retreats.
And I'm Nicola Graham, a strategy advisor in human performance.
So before we get into today's show, here's a few words from our kind sponsor, IBSA. Osteoarthritis is the leading cause of pain and disability in the UK. As our bodies age, there is a loss of naturally occurring hyaluronic acid within our joints, which can lead to reduced shock absorption and lubrication. This can contribute to the development of osteoarthritis, resulting in joint pain, stiffness, and difficulty carrying out daily activities, such as going to work and exercising. Synovial HL is a joint injection with the highest concentration of hyaluronic acid available in the UK, effectively restoring hyaluronic acid in the joint. It is scientifically proven to reduce pain and increase joint function, preserving your joint into the future. Synovial HL is injected in a simple procedure which offers an alternative to medication and surgery. If you'd like to find out more, please visit synovial.co.uk for full product information and a list of clinics offering Synovial HL injections. Synovial. Move freely, live fully. Disclaimer. The procedure must be carried out by an appropriately trained healthcare professional.
Welcome to the WellCare Podcast. In this episode, we are joined by Steve Miller, an experienced sports physiotherapist, tutor and coach. Steve's career has seen him work across private practice, rugby, judo and gymnastics, and he's currently working with the UK Sports Institute. Steve is passionate about injury rehabilitation and focusing currently on physical and psychological readiness for performance. And so, Steve, what does wellness mean to you?
Oh, thanks, Nicola. Yeah, I mean, wellness is multifactorial, isn't it? So it's probably interpreted very differently from different walks of life and different lenses that we sort of live in, really. As a physio working in elite sport and sort of having experiences in other worlds, I'm very much on the side of sort of that physical preparation side of things, but the very close similarities and overlaps between the physical and the psychological side is obviously apparent for everyone to see, really. I know that athletes will be in a much, much better state of mind and physically perform a lot better if they're psychologically in a good place. But yeah, physically, most of the things that I see, injuries, niggles, tightnesses that you have, and then in terms of sort of the carry on from maybe not sort of performing, not exercising, not competing, can have a massive impact in terms of the wellness that people have psychologically. So it can be very, very frustrating for athletes who are almost wired into performance. And again, like I think anyone who trains regularly, if you pick up something or you're traveling and you're not training as much, I'm sure George is in this category. I'm sure he will become very grouchy if he's not exercising. It can have a massive impact on the kind of endorphin release and obviously that kind of performance element hit that you have. I think that spills over that sort of category into relationships outside of work. So people who are maybe not competing, that might have a financial impact for them. That might be that they're being paid directly from the sport. It might be performance led, that they have to perform at a certain level to get paid. If they are appearing in something like football or rugby, they'll often have an appearance bonus. But actually it might also kick into, they have to then pay if they're not able to physically do things as well, for things that are sort of things that maybe took for granted. So that can have another sort of extra dimension that way, really. So yeah, really, really multifactorial, can influence relationships, both at work, outside of work, as a partner, as a parent, all those sort of elements, really, from a wellness perspective, all feeds in there, really.
Amazing. I mean, what a full answer, straight out of the box. Hey, that's brilliant, Steve. So look, for everybody else, so Steve and I met at the Olympics in 2012, working at beach volleyball and volleyball. It was a brilliant fortnight, and we met Helen Glover on the Super Saturday day in that middle, wasn't it? When we got our first gold. Steve gives me his phone and goes, "Take a picture of me and Helen." I was like, waiting for the reverse to happen. Didn't happen. So Steve has a beautiful picture of him and Helen Glover, which I took. Thanks very much, Steve. But yeah, so you've been you've been in and around a lot of high level athletes for a long period of time. What do you think are the sort of key parts to supercharging someone's recovery once they've had a big injury? We talk about faster recovery, faster results, a faster return to sport, that being the real ethos around the sports medicine side of the Citius retreats. But what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And apologies, George. I didn't realise you were still bitter 12 about that photograph.
Only 12 years, mate. We're okay.
With me there, with the big old gold medal around. So, yeah, I treasure that. Sorry about that. You can probably Photoshop me now in the world of AI.
I was going to say, there's AI now. You can sort it out.
Exactly. We'll do that for you.
I wouldn't want to disrespect the history.
But yeah, in terms of kind of the question in terms of supercharging recovery, I mean, if someone has had an injury, the way that it normally looks within a sort of an elite professional world, and also what I've sort of carried over into private practice and would recommend doing in any forms of healthcare, is almost sit down with that athlete. They've maybe got their diagnosis already. You're going to relay what that is, what that looks like in terms of the outlay of time that usually is required from a healing perspective. But the critical bits that I think that don't get done quite as well as they should do is almost sort of segmenting it into specific goals and targets that they want to try and hit along that journey. So we know from science that some sorts of injuries will take X amount of time for a tissue to heal after an injury. But even once that's healed, they may be very, very vulnerable to re-injury again if they haven't got the physical and sort of psychological readiness to return. So we spend a lot of time accruing data, testing individuals, comparing what their injured versus non-injured side is like, how that compares to other individuals who are going back into the activity that they're going to go back into. So they've also got targets, and gets a little bit competitive sometimes, that they really want to try and hit or beat other people who are in their sort of category or position or whatever it is. So that's a really nice element that gets them motivated to start with. They can see a lay of the land. Don't get me wrong, there's some individuals who will want to know everything, the absolute minutiae of detail, and other ones who will just turn up going, just tell me what I need to do to get back. And they're not bothered about the nitty-gritty side of things. But I think sitting down initially and sort of talking through what they're going to need to do and how difficult that journey is going to be in parts. From working with a lot of people individual-wise, you know that psychologically and mentally some stages are a little bit harder than others. And I think probably preempting that before you start is a really valuable thing, because some people won't have had injuries before. Some of our athletes that I work with at the moment have had 4 ACL reconstructions. Judo is a very brutal sport on knees. And yeah, we're doing a lot of things to try and almost prevent that happening. And obviously a lot of that is the recovery side of things. So we have, from a purely recovery perspective, if you like, so people who are fit and training, we have a points-based system that we work on. So we weight it depending on how much bang for your buck it gives you, depending on the intensity and the timing of their journey, and how intensive their competition schedule is, how much travel they have. Maybe if they played 90 minutes in football at high level versus maybe coming on as a substitute for 15 minutes, it'll be very different, but we're trying to get them to accrue a certain number of points that sort of marries up with how much demand there is in the body. So then therefore they could perform better the next day if they've done everything they can do to almost prepare themselves for that, if that makes sense. Recovery comes in all shapes and forms, really. Don't know whether we want to go into that. Do you want any of that? Or is that too much in depth?
Go on, we might come back around to that in a minute. Otherwise, we're going to miss out on some other good pearls of wisdom from your good self. I know you've obviously worked a lot with athletes where it's a full-time environment and it's their role to be doing that rehab. Some of that rehab's done obviously in-house in the club. Other bits of time is spent away just with other super specialists, keeps it fresh for everybody involved. Thinking about the more desk-based athlete that we will see in the outside non-professional sports world, what do you think the barriers are for those people in terms of returning back to the sport as soon as possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's a classic one, and something that when I worked the last 3 years across in Bupa and in private healthcare to take a bit of a gap out of professional sport, that's what we worked with quite a lot. So we were seeing people maybe once a week, dropping in with regular telephone consultations, dropping in texts. They would have a bit of an accountability as well, that they almost logged how they were doing on an app to make sure that they were doing what we said, whether they were actually doing it or not. We kind of have a bit of a trust element, but on that, I'd probably never trust an athlete ever, but maybe some of the general public. When they say that they are doing bits and bobs, then yeah, you kind of go off it. I'd ask them to send little videos. We jump on and do some sort of FaceTime distance things so we could look at the techniques that people were performing things with. So although maybe we'd touch base maybe once a week or maybe twice a week, we still had a lot of little mini contact points and accountability elements that come with that. And I think for me, that's probably one of the big reasons I think people go to physio or personal trainers, is just literally it's an accountability element of you've made a commitment, you've got a regular slot in. It does come with motivation bits. You're going to be with somebody, they're going to guide you through that journey. But actually, yeah, almost encouraging and ensuring that you commit to that process is really key. And I think what I would often do is almost set them goals each time. So if I wasn't going to see them for maybe a couple of weeks, for example, I'd say that these are the things that I really need you to be able to do by the time you come back again. And that then leads you one step closer to getting back to whatever activity it is, be it running, triathlon, cycling, five-a-side football, whatever it may be. But I think it's really important to see how each section and each stage and each goal gets them closer and closer to what their end goal may be. Because sometimes you might jump into a gym, be doing deadlifts and things, or doing some squats or single leg work, and not really appreciate how that feeds into the journey. So there's a lot of upskilling education, things that I try to empower a lot of the individuals that I've worked with, so they take the reins a little bit more and are maybe ultra reliant on us all the time, really.
The common theme that kind of comes out and from my clinical career is that level of transparent communication with people, because it's not going to be a nice linear trajectory rehab, is it? It's got lots of ups, downs, kind of forwards, backwards, and being able to kind of continue that level of communication with people is really key. When you then kind of start to think about it from the other end, what do you notice are like the common themes, both from like a physical and psychological perspective, that impacts performance? If we kind of take that conversation slightly away from that rehab phase, but when they're into that, it's not ongoing rehab at that point, so it's into when they are performing in sport.
As in to try and keep them fit once they're back, or as in what are some of the shortfalls that? Yeah, the
shortfalls. So things that are happening that then impact their performance, both from a physical and psychological perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably, as you mentioned there, the word linear is what I think most people think will happen. Whereas I think this is where that sort of preparatory chats is really important, because it might be quite slow initially during a rehab journey and then suddenly takes off. The things which I find are the key things that get done really poorly are people don't get back to the strength levels that they should be at. It might be you've got them back to marry up what the other side is like, but if their initial starting point's not very good, you can't really compare left to right very well. You've got to look a little bit further afield and see what other people are hitting target-wise. So definitely the strength element, I would say there's certainly a lack of strength and control in the ranges where that injury is going to take place. So people may have done quite generic programs or exercises, but not being ultra specific on the ranges. So like something like an Achilles problem, for example, or a calf tear, people will have done calf raises and things off the floor and gone maybe with quite a lot of weight, but not worked into the sort of almost end terminal eccentric or isometric long, like almost muscle stick that we call it, that muscle tendon, almost stiffness that we develop that's around there in the ranges that they're going to tear. So therefore they end up breaking down. We haven't mimicked enough of the sport specific or activity specific demands of that sport. So again, being in rehab, you want to be really creative, to be honest. So it's really nice to try and get into the heads of the individual that you're working with, get into the head of the coaches. What parts of their performance do they need to improve on, or what is it that's going to potentially put them at more vulnerability to re-injury, and mimic that with a fair bit of chaos almost in a rehab environment. So they're almost physically and psychologically better prepared going into that thing that they might have had some barriers into. So if they've injured it in a certain way, when, I don't know, you get tackled and battered into some hoardings on the side of a Premiership rugby pitch, that same motion might well be a little bit of a psychological barrier. So people might feel like, well, actually, I do need to get tackled from that side in an incremental sort of fashion and just get used to that element of contact. I'm not going to do that as a man who's 80 something kilos, but yeah, it might be not running at full Magumba down a pitch, but almost trying to make sure they are psychologically ready as well as hit all the physical markers, because there's some really good adapted psychological markers, particularly for ACL rehab, to make sure people are also ready rather than just physically hitting targets. So we'll always do that. And then very much once they're back, it's a case of keeping an eye on them. So we'll have 4 or 5 key markers. Some of them are subjective, sort of readiness to train markers, like how well have they slept, how ready are they to train, what's their recovery levels been, diet been like, etc. And then almost a few very quick little self-checks that individuals will do that will normally be very specific to whatever it is that they've injured, and then maybe some things that leave them a bit more vulnerable. And that might be 2-minute quick check in the morning, work on any correctives, and then make sure that they're ready for whatever it is.
I was interviewing a physio actually just the other day for our private practice, and he's a new grad or a master's kind of pre-reg, and he was talking about I really get the kind of psychological readiness and trying to recreate environments, but the bit that he picked up on, which I thought was really interesting, is actually what happens before and after that as well. So not just recreating when that injury happened, but what's the type of play or something that happens after that. So you can actually recreate not just that moment of like an injury or part of that sport, but a part of a kind of a wider part of that sport that they're playing, really, if that makes sense. But those are not. I know he was a new grad, and he'd done a kinesiology degree beforehand, but these are not always kind of skills at a basic practitioner level. So over your kind of career, and so if we do kind of 2 parts to this question, really, from a practitioner point of view, but also then from kind of a patient perspective, where have these skills, where's that creativity, that problem solving, how have you developed that kind of toolkit within what you offer to people?
Yeah, I think some of it, well, you're absolutely right. So from an undergraduate physio perspective, even though you spend 3 years working your socks off, you don't really come out feeling very ready to deal with, certainly not private practice. Like I kind of would never have gone into private practice straight away, just because I feel like there's so much demand and expectation that comes with that. And I feel like you probably need to have some patient mileage. And I'm not saying that that's applicable to everybody. But certainly, yeah, I used to spend almost probably like 1 weekend a month traveling around, going on different courses, probably for the first 18 months that I was there. I sort of felt like after about 5 or 6 years, I'd sort of plateaued a little bit. So I felt like I want to try and upskill a little bit more. So I did a master's that had a clinical paid placement aspect to it. And then really on the back of that, you learn a lot from other practitioners and sharing and developing. So one of the key things and the reasons for me doing what's called an MACP, which was a prerequisite really to make sure that we could teach on the in-house program with Connect Physiotherapy, was that I really wanted to try and give back and share and upskill that kind of way. So, and then, you do just learn a lot on the job from making some errors. Some other people have made errors. Do you know what I mean? You kind of learn from some things that go really, really well, and you go, well, I'm going to recreate those things. I think the natural thing is that human nature is we focus on the negative things, but actually sometimes when things go really well, it's like, well, why did that go so well? And sometimes it's just you haven't seen this before, so you've got to reach out and get some feedback from other people in the industry. Certainly, I'd done that quite a lot with Andy Williams down at Fortius, quite a few times, asked him and James with anything sort of foot and ankle related. So it's been really useful to have key contacts that you trust, who you know have got protocols and advice and experience and things. And yeah, I think probably working in a department where there's sort of 3 or 4 physios all working together, you look at the way people do things, and then they've got all different experiences. And yeah, the beauty of it is no one presents the same, do they? So
no, most definitely.
What works for one may not work for another.
And you've really leaned into, I suppose, that kind of multidisciplinary team aspect for health and rehab there as well. In an elite sports setting, that's kind of a given that there will always be that MDT. In private practice, for the general population, that's not as it can be achieved, but it's usually at quite a cost, and it's not the norm kind of setting. When you think about kind of Citius retreats or a kind of an intensive period of rehab, in general. What would be the benefit for someone that you could see of attending an event or an experience like that?
Well, I think the closest thing that we have to that is something called the intensive rehab unit, that is the IRU in our sort of UKSI world. And we use that as an amazing resource where athletes will go down and they will go through a battery of testing. We will always have a handover to start with. So I think it's also really useful to kind of get the insight of the athlete of where they feel that they're at, what they need help with, what we feel like as a little bit of a touch point of the things that we've identified with us that maybe need some development, or maybe is there a reason why they're a bit vulnerable to injury. And then what we'll do is we'll hand that over to them, and they're exactly what you're saying there, the sort of the creme de la creme scenario, really, that is what Citius will have as well. So it's you've got potentially sport and exercise medicine consultants that are there. They'll obviously kind of deal with a lot of the medical things. They can do invasive things. We've got physios who are there who will be able to work intensively with an individual on a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 basis. We'll be able to get numbers and stats and figures that back up what things that the individuals need to work on. I think the world that we live in, if you aren't using data, you're probably falling behind the times, to be fair. So a lot of the time, those days of art feels a little bit better now that you've done X, Y, Z. It is probably almost a little bit past. And it's certainly moving a lot more to, you need to hit targets, might be strength-based, might be range of motion-based. There might be a number of reps or capacity of a muscle and the ability for it to cope with whatever it's doing. But yeah, what we come out with from there, which would be the same sort of thing, which is so valuable, is the ability to kind of get a snapshot on a few bits of paper visually of where individuals are at the start of a week, and then what they are like potentially by the end of a week, and then if we want to send them back. So we will normally send individuals back every 3 months to a IRU world where they give us some things to work on. We'll work on that in the background, and then the beauty is they go and recheck. And ideally, you can't hide if it's number-based, so they should start to hit the targets and the goals and things, or be getting closer to where they are. But it's really motivating for the individual and gives them something specific to work on. And it really kind of helps to have someone almost hold their hand through that journey. And obviously, like, if something crops up, I can bounce something to George. Do you know what I mean? If he's in that environment, he might go, oh, actually, nutritionist might need a little bit of input. Actually go and see Steve and go and get some soft tissue work, because I think although you've got X, Y, Z going on, you'll really benefit from this. And having multiple sets of eyes on you, sometimes I think people become a little bit almost blinkered a little bit. You kind of go a bit one-dimensional, whereas having lots of eyes on is so valuable to make sure you don't miss anything that ensures performance, really.
I'm loving listening to hear you talk there, Steve. We didn't sort of script this in any kind of way, just for the people at home who are listening to this. And just a backstory in there a little bit on some of the abbreviations. So the IRU is the Intermediate Rehabilitation Unit, which is run by the UK Sports Institute. It looks after all of our Olympic athletes across the whole of sort of Team GB network, really. And it's very much somewhere where I've spent a bit of time during my career, and Steve evidently has, and a lot of the UK Sport Institute doctors and physios, sports scientists, etc., have interacted with it a lot. They only take 3 patients at a time, 3 athletes at a time, and they can be at any stage in their rehab. But certainly the good practices that are done there is exactly what we're modeling with our Citius retreat concept, particularly the ACL one. And obviously, I think we can all hear Steve's passion here for going down and working with lots of practitioners and bringing those good working practices together. Because, ACL rehab in particular is very long. Even within a professional sport environment, let's use Premiership football, they're aiming for 7.5 months to get back on the pitch, which is incredible when you think that most ordinary people, desk-based athletes who've got jobs and lives to balance around, you're looking at really 12 to 18 months with a strong re-injury risk as well. So having the data, working with specialists to mitigate risks so you don't have adverse outcomes, and that you have as smooth as possible. But as Steve says, not always fully smooth, even in the best environments. So it's good. Steve, it's been great chatting about all this stuff with you. And I'm sure we're going to do more of it into the future. Nick, have you got any more questions for Steve?
Yeah, I suppose really from the accountability aspect, I think is really interesting, because I'm a physio by background. I very similar kind of what you've talked about. I went on courses whenever I could. When I first graduated, I went and did the MACP Masters at Birmingham. Like I worked with UK athletics and really modelled that kind of EIS perspective. But I always thought of myself as a physio, and I think there is more and more that lean into kind of coach in its broadest kind of sense, because so much of, even from an athletic but also a general population perspective, we're partnering with people on their health journeys, and that is a continuum, and it changes, and we shouldn't see it so much. A lot of kind of our clinical practice, especially if we spent time in public health systems in the NHS, it was all around discharge, get there as quickly as possible. But actually, who's benefiting out of that? Like really that, and I think we'll talk more and more to practitioners on this podcast about like preventative role makes it sound like there isn't a problem there to start off with, the preventative role of healthcare. That's not the case either. So it is around this WellCare and keeping people so you may not have the same injury, but there's always parts of our body that we can work on. And as you kind of alluded to there, especially on the strength tests, and as we get more and more data out of VALD and force decks and all that objective testing, we're going to be able to create more and more normative data around that. So where do you, I suppose my kind of question around that is, we've had this reactive, you've got an injury, let's get you sorted, let's discharge you. Then you could go, there's the other end of kind of preventative healthcare, and it's like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like that's kind of, in my eyes, like biohacking. Like you're trying to get these differences that are obviously really important to you, but they don't have a wild scalability, I think, because they're too personalized to some degree. Where do you see kind of the future of, and it doesn't need to be physio specifically, but healthcare and wellness kind of merging that keeps people on a more maintenance journey, or a more involved and engaged throughout their health, really, rather than it just be a snapshot, you've got an injury and then you never engage with services again or practitioners again. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think it's a really good point, isn't it? And there you kind of laid the land out really nicely there. I definitely think there's a collectiveness where if you almost bring in some element and build on that accountability, and it might be that you are working as part of a kind of a community sort of thing. Like I was in Birmingham Children's Hospital the other day, and they had a really nice just little bike that was on the wall, and all of the staff were basically trying to raise money for a charity, but for every single kind of 10 miles that they went on an exercise bike or the spin bike in the gym, they just moved it forward. And I think it was really nice because everybody is just chipping into this little visual thing on the wall. And if you can kind of build that in a community kind of setup, and almost a lot of the time, it's why people have a training partner, isn't it? Like it's just a reason that on the days when you don't want to do something, you've already said that you're going to do it. And therefore, I will go along. And yeah, I've got a friend who really likes painting. It's completely off topic, this, but basically what she's wanting to do is become a professional full-time artist and come out of teaching. And to do that, she said, well, her mentor said, well, you've got to be doing it every single day. What is the minimum amount of time that you can do that per day? Like, and she said, well, I've got 3 kids, but I can fit 20 minutes would be the minimum. So every single day she does 20 minutes. And often what she sometimes does is she's so busy, 20 minutes is the max, but actually getting up there, sometimes she'll lose herself in 3 hours worth of it. But I think the actually doing and starting thing is a really nice kind of just commitment that you've made. And it's something that you've said, that is the minimum amount that I can do. But actually by saying you do that, you end up doing a little bit more of that. And I think a lot of the world that we live in, where again, loads of GPS things like Stravas and things are great, aren't they? It's just to kind of go, well, actually it's keeping a log of what I'm doing, so I can look back. And even if you look at any iPhone or anything, it tells how many steps you've done. All these sorts of things are lovely, aren't they? Without even spending any money, you can have loads of data in your pocket. So I think it's lovely to have little short-term goals, long-term goals, commitments, accountabilities. And you're absolutely right on the coaching side of things. Like to try and engage people. I think I was probably guilty of this when I went into private practice, thinking everyone's just going to want hands-on treatment. So I'll get them in, I'll just have a quick chat with them, work out what it is going on, then just start treating. And then with 2 minutes to go, say, oh, these are your exercises, this is what I want you to do. And actually the reality is now I have a chat with, right, so what time do you have in your diary? Because there's no point in making a sexy gourmet rehab program that takes an hour if people only have 15 minutes in their day. So I think it's just being realistic that you could have a lovely rehab program that never gets done, but actually a little small one that ticks off the key fundamental bits that gives you a lot of bang for your buck is far more valuable. So I think it's you're almost kind of getting to know that individual, building up that rapport, understanding where they're at and where you're at. And then you almost come to a middle ground of this would be the gourmet version. This is what you have. This is kind of a meet in the middle. So they feel like I've been listened to. They understand my situation. How are you going to fit that in? And almost like looking at the nitty gritty of like, what does a day look like? How are you going to find that 15 minutes? Is it at lunchtime on your lunch break? Is it once the kids are off to bed? Is it first thing in the morning where you set your alarm 15, 20 minutes early? But yeah, I think that sort of accountability and tapping into that is great to do. I mean, now at the moment, all I do is just wipe tears away from athletes at the moment who are either competing or getting ready to qualify and picking up little niggles and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's definitely just the human side of it that builds that lovely kind of therapist-patient relationship, really.
And I think that kind of leads into some of that data piece of like, we used to also have like, so how much better are you? Objectify it kind of from like 0, you're where you were, 100% you're better. And it's like, well, actually, I've kind of come around to how valuable is that? Because 100% 6 months ago will be 100% if your goals have changed in that time. And I suppose this alludes to kind of what we want to title your episode around, what's the impact of injury to an individual, because it is an opportunity to come back better, but it's also, I suppose, a point where you reevaluate what you want. And this is not just from a sporting perspective, but from a kind of general population perspective as well. And something like an ACL is a massive injury that then it allows you kind of to set those specific goals, but also to reevaluate them on a continuous basis if you've got that accountability and that coach and that commitment to kind of what the rehab is. Because we also have conversations with people sometimes in our clinic and they've smashed their goals. So it's like, where do you want to go next? Like, and I think if you haven't had an elite MDT approach to your rehab, then kind of 60% can sometimes be good enough, depending on what the demands are on that service. Whereas we know kind of our bodies are probably capable of way much more, and therefore setting those, I suppose, realistic timeframes of 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, it is a continuous process that people have to adhere to. And that's where I think I lean into that more, that we've all within healthcare and wellbeing have a coaching element to it, because it is that continuous process.
Yeah, but it's also getting that balance, isn't it, around time. People like, how long is this going to take? Like on day one, suddenly you can just magically tell them it's going to take you 6 months because, as Steve was talking about, what does normative data look like? And therefore, how are you matching against normative data? Well, we actually don't have a lot of that normative data necessarily, because most people don't have pre-injury data on themselves. You would do if you're an athlete, because you'd have pre-participation screening, you'd have pre-season screening, you'd probably have weekly screening post a match or competition to know if you're back ready to continue to then train onwards. So you've got lots of data, whereas people, the desk-based athlete, world that we're going to be seeing on our retreats, they don't have a lot of that normative data. So educating them, as Steve's saying, on what normative data looks like to then give them realistic timeframes, because managing people's expectations is probably another big thing in a coaching space. If you tell someone a time, they get fixated with the time, but they necessarily don't quite perhaps do as much work as they could do. Particularly, as Steve points out, most people are time compromised with what they can do to fit around life. And therefore, residential settings allow people to super focus for that time on themselves and on their journey, because as everyone's saying here, it's a journey, but you've got to understand it's a stepwise process that isn't linear, that will have good days and bad days, that sometimes people around you will need to drag you through it, that actually is quite good if you've then been able to share time with people who are going through similar things, because in most of the time, even if you're an athlete in a high performance setting, there probably aren't two ACLs at the same time, or certainly if there are, the club environment's in crisis as to why that's happened, because there's probably something we can mitigate against it so that we don't get a third. Particularly if you look in the female athlete health space and the larger number of ACLs that they've had in that area. And there's huge amounts of work going on there that we want to be part of around putting data on how you prevent these things. But then when they do happen, how do you get people back quicker? So it's that mix of the science and the art of what rehabilitation is, which goes back to what Steve was saying around how you all want to mix in together as practitioners, work together. You've all seen things, you're all seeing things differently. How do you keep it fresh for everybody, practitioner as well as the person going through the process? And that keeps it fun, keeps them engaged, keeps everybody engaged, and really moves the whole process forward. So the cumulative effect is always brilliant, which is why when it comes to these retreats, we really want to be focusing on good qualities of practitioners who'll create exactly that environment that you get in these special high performance environments, where people are there coming together to share ideas and share understanding and share knowledge to really supercharge people forward on their journey. Because like you say, it might be they don't want to go back to what they were doing before, but this is going to take them in a different direction. How do you prepare them for that different direction?
Yeah, I don't think you can underestimate the value of sharing your stories with people. Like, people will go on blogs and things online, won't they? And they'll try and find out things. But actually, hearing it firsthand is so valuable. And that's what a lot of the guys that we send away will take so much from, almost just sharing. It might not be the same injury, as you say, but that ability to share their story and what they're feeling, frustrations and annoyances and everything is really, really helpful, probably way more so than I realized. And it's interesting you say, actually, Nicola, about the 60% thing that we get them back to and then basically discharge them. That was the thing that catalyzed me when my manager said, what we want from you, Steve, is to get them 60% better and then discharge them, back in the day of NHS Worlds. And that was the final straw for me. It's just, there's so much more. People will break down. They won't hit the targets that they were at before. And as you say, humans are pretty incredible people, aren't we? Our bodies can do amazing things. I think we can certainly push them much, much further to a much better place, really, than they are being kicked out from.
And I think for me, it was very much like, who am I to put a ceiling on you, a glass ceiling on you? And I didn't, it completely went against my values as a practitioner to work in an environment that put a limitation on someone. That just didn't sit comfortably with me, which is what allowed me, I suppose, in private practice to have more autonomy in how I spoke to people and how we worked with them.
We're doing all right, team, aren't we?
We're doing great. The sharing is brilliant. Well, look, Steve, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. I knew it would be. Great sharing. Great hearing what you're up to. We are recording this at a time where you're about to go to a very big competition, which we're not going to mention by name, but very good luck with that. And we'll all be cheering you on. And by the time this goes out, hopefully we'll be sharing in some success from you and your team.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I'll try and send some selfies back with some gold medals, what have you.
Thank you for your time.
Good man. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Thanks for having me.
That's the end of this week's episode. Thanks again to our kind sponsors, IBSA. Osteoarthritis is the leading cause of pain and disability in the UK. As our bodies age, there is a loss of naturally occurring hyaluronic acid within our joints, which can lead to reduced shock absorption and lubrication. This can contribute to the development of osteoarthritis, resulting in joint pain, stiffness, and difficulty carrying out daily activities, such as going to work and exercising. Synovial HL is a joint injection with the highest concentration of hyaluronic acid available in the UK, effectively restoring hyaluronic acid in the joint. It is scientifically proven to reduce pain and increase joint function, preserving your joint into the future. Synovial HL is injected in a simple procedure which offers an alternative to medication and surgery. If you'd like to find out more, please visit synovial.co.uk for full product information and a list of clinics offering synovial HL injections. Synovial. Move freely, live fully. Disclaimer. The procedure must be carried out by an appropriately trained healthcare professional.